Okay, we are live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the summer webinar series of the Center of Research, Innovation and Design, the CRID. I'm Patricia Tulani and will be moderating today's webinar. Today, we are privileged and honored to be welcoming a very special guest. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Mr. Sultan Sooud Al Qassemi. Welcome, Sultan. Mr. Al Qassemi is the founder of Barjeel Art Foundation and co-editor of Building Sharjah, a book that chronicles the modern architecture in Sharjah. Sultan is a columnist and researcher on social, political, and cultural affairs in the Arab Gulf states, whose article appeared in multiple notable publications such as Financial Times, The Independent, The Guardian, and many others. Mr. Qassemi is a visiting lecturer at the Islamic Civilization and Society program in Boston College, as well as the School of Public Affairs at Science in Pau, France. As an Emirati voice, Mr. Al Qassemi has impacted widely the cultural and social changes in the region. He has played an important role in elevating the art scene in the Gulf region. Today, in his presentation, Sultan will be discussing the architectural journey of Zahra Hospital in Sharjah. Before giving the floor to Sultan, I would like to ask the attendees to type their questions in the Q&A section or send them privately to me. Sultan, I know that you hate long introductions, but not that you need them, but it was a must. Welcome, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Thanks to Professor George Kashami and the Center for Research and Innovation and Design at the American University of Dubai. I've attended a number of your talks, so it's a pleasure and an honor to be here as well. I will be sharing my screen now, and we will go on a quick journey on the history of one of Sharjah's major landmarks, which is Zahra Hospital in Sharjah. So this is a general view of the hospital, taken perhaps sometime in the early 80s or late 70s or early 80s. As you can see, the building has just been completed. Some of the windows have not even been installed, and everything is quite new. Let me begin by saying that few institutions are as pivotal to a city's modern history as one of its major healthcare providers. Unlike, say, commercial towers or imposing government buildings that are generally specialized use facilities, healthcare centers are concerned with the entire community and are visited by a wide range of the population. Sharjah's Al Zahra Private Hospital is one such landmark. Now renamed NMC Royal Hospital Sharjah and encompassing 153 beds, the project had an entirely different genesis. So we're going to learn what the genesis was of this project. Built at a cost of 24 million dirhams in the late 1970s, the 84-room structure originally was envisioned to be a hotel and was converted into a hospital that served under the moniker of Al Zahra for more than 40 years, the urban conurbation of not only Sharjah, but also Dubai and Ajman. Al Zahra's story can be regarded as an indicator with which we can measure not only the growth of Sharjah city, but of that of the UAE circa 1980. How and why were projects imagined? Why were existing structures repurposed? And who paid for such large developments? I hope to shed some light on these and other questions over the next 20 minutes or so. So what you see here now is exclusive. I don't think this has ever been shown before anywhere. This is actually a page that appears in Building Sharjah. And so that's why I put the source all over the place, because I was trying to protect the individual Todd Rees, my colleague, who had sought this sketch. This is the original 1969 proposal of Al Zahra Square by Hal Crow. The proposed hotel was to be situated on the southern end of what came to be known as Al Zahra Square, also referred to for many years as Clock Tower Square in Sharjah. The square initially featured in this Hal Crow's 1969 second version of their master plan. The first one was 63, came back 6 years later and proposed in 69 this expansion of Sharjah city, all feature in Building Sharjah. It was commissioned for the then ruler, Sheikh Khalid bin Muhammad Al Qassemi. As you can see from this drawing, which features in Writing Sharjah's Landscape, Todd Rees's essay in Building Sharjah, the bottom right corner of the square is proposed, as proposed by Halcrow, included the phrase possible hotel site. I'm not sure if it is clear for you, but this is where it says possible hotel site, but that is not where Al-Zahra would eventually be built. Al-Zahra would be built on the southern corner, here portrayed on the left side of the plan, where it says possible market site. We know that because of the location of Al-Musalla District Cemetery, which sits to the right of Al-Zahra. This is a cemetery that dates back a century. Al-Zahra stands here to the left of the cemetery. And as you can see, this is a plan developed by Halcrow that already envisioned a square called Al-Zahra Square eventually. Al-Zahra Square was proposed as a new commercial site in Sharjah, pushing the city's main market site further inland from the creek. Originally, all the shops were in the creek, but they wanted to push it more inland and create a new commercial center for the city. It was the meeting point of 4 main arteries linking residential and commercial neighborhoods. A large Egyptian and Sudanese community formed around it and operated a number of specialized stores for decades. At the time of the master plan in 1969, the square hosted a clock tower in the shape of a flower with open petals, gifted by a German firm that was busy working on expanding Sharjah port. So the clock tower, which looks like a flower from the top, was actually gifted by a German firm called Beton and Monenbrau, and it is a firm from Dusseldorf that came to Sharjah to expand the port. And they gifted Sharjah this beautiful clock tower that lasted for almost 4 decades. It might be that Al-Zahra Square and subsequently the hospital were named after the German gifted flower-shaped clock tower. Another major landmark of the square to the right was Sharjah Court House. Both landmarks have since been demolished. So the court has been demolished and the clock tower, the Zahra, the flower, has been replaced by another monument. Now, let's hear a little bit about the construction firm that built Al-Zahra Hospital. Al-Zahra Hospital was built by one of Sharjah's leading civil engineering and contracting companies, Eastern Construction, which was established in 1974. Still in operation, Eastern is responsible for some of Sharjah's most prominent healthcare and hospitality landmarks, including the Intercontinental, which it constructed in association with the US firm Bechtel. Its founder, you see him to the top on the right, Abdurrahman Bukhatir, is mostly known as the man who brought cricket to the UAE and who had spent his formative years studying in Karachi, where he completed his secondary studies at the historic PVS Parsi High School, learning to speak both Urdu and English in addition to Arabic, skills that were very essential for him in dealing with construction companies from the subcontinent and architects and engineers. In addition to Al-Zahra, Bukhatir's Eastern built projects in the eastern coast, such as the Holiday Inn, Khorfakkan, and a slew of low-income housing projects for the federal government across the UAE. On the bottom right is a photo of Eastern chief engineer, V.S. Sanghavi, who graduated from the Indian Institute of Technology in Mumbai in 1968 with a B.Tech degree in civil engineering. Here you see him sitting here in a suit, signing a contract to construct a mental hospital in the UAE with the then Minister of Public Works, Mohammed Khalifa Al-Kindi. So the same company was constructing several hospital and hotel projects. They had experience in this field. Moving on, who is the architect? The task to design this project fell on Ashok Mody, a Gujarati who was then only 27 years old. Mody had graduated with a Bachelor's of Architecture from the University of Bombay only 4 years prior. Between 1971 and 1974, he worked as a senior architect at Karani and Sanghoy in Bombay. According to the architect, Bukhatir, the gentleman you saw on the previous slide, and their Mumbai client, Mufattraj Munot, very famous, prominent Indian businessman, became partners and established Eastern Contracting Company. Mufattraj introduced his friend, an architect, to Bukhatar, and the trio decided to start Architectural Consultants, and that is the name of the firm that designed Zahra Hospital, Architectural Consultants. Ashok Mody took charge of the office in 1975, and they opened their main office in Al-Uruba Street, very important thoroughfare in Sharjah from the 1970s onwards. Mufattraj Munot, the Indian businessman, was a real estate developer and founder of a very important group in India, still in existence, called the Kalpataru Construction Group, which eventually would partner with Bukhatar's Eastern to build some of the Sharjah's famous Bank Street towers. So their friendship and their relationship and partnership that started with meeting for Al Zahra Hospital or Zahra Hotel led them to build Bank Street, which is still today's one of Sharjah's main landmarks. Due to the scope of the project, Mody drafted initial sketches in Sharjah, but the detailed drawings were sent to Bombay in India, to the main office there, to be finalized. This provided both an opportunity because of the availability of trained architects in Bombay, but also a challenge, especially in circumstances where we will hear in a couple of minutes, where the client could request major changes, such as introducing a cinema and moving facilities to another floor. It took 6 months to design the plans for Al Zahra Hotel, and the senior partner from the firm flew in from Bombay to Sharjah to oversee the design and the execution. This is, I think, also a very rare document that people don't generally see. This is a building permit from the municipality from the 1970s. You can see that the land permit here, the land permit dates back to 1971, which is only 2 years after the Halcrow plan of 1969 for Sharjah. The permit was finally granted on the 1st of September 1976. You see the date at the very top, for those who read Arabic. And the top line, the name of Sharjah Real Estate, الشركة الشارقة العقارية, the entity that requested the building permit, is written. In the second line, the name of the contractor, Eastern, is mentioned. Then the neighborhood of Al Ghuwair. And number 4, you see that in the Indian numerals, is the purpose of the project, and it states that it's a 7-story building with a hotel and a cinema. The permit was valid for only 6 months, and at the very bottom you also read that the building permit states that it should be respectful of the neighboring building's privacy. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Here you see, maybe for the first time ever to be seen in public, the plans for Al Zahra Hospital. 13 pages working drawings were submitted for this project by Architectural Consultants, the name of the architecture firm, with remodification of the design. Further plans were naturally submitted in March and October 1975, and in fact, more than 2 or 3 times the plans kept getting updated. The building's design is aligned with the site boundaries, overlooking Al Zahra Square. This resulted in a curved corner elevation with an array of notable hexagonal openings on the ground floor facade, which I will show you in the next screen. A never realized design feature that resembles Arabic Kufic calligraphy was designed by senior partner architect Jagdish Shah. Can you take a look here? For me, it looked like Arabic, but this was never realized. However, it was an interesting architectural feature, and you see the name here of the initial developer, Abdurrahman Bukhatar. And here from that drawing in the previous page, you see the hexagonal windows or openings that were a common feature throughout the building. Finally, this perspective sketch was done by a professional Indian architect called Joe Farrow, a 1958 graduate of the Academy of Architecture in Mumbai, based on Architectural Consultants' design. Such detailed sketches were not too common back in the mid-1970s, and only a few firms produced them. As you can see, it includes writing in both Arabic and English. The cinema was already featured in the sketch. There's apparently showcasing a movie called The Adventurers. The cinema here was called Metro, but as we will hear, that was in the final name. And you see to the bottom right, a couple of people wearing Khaliji or Emirati outfit are featured. And thanks, of course, to the architect Ashok Mody for giving me permission to show these images and these drawings. Now we come to the cinema. Sometime after the construction work of Al Zahra Hotel started, the developers wanted to expand on the amenities that were offered in their hotel. In addition to the hotel lobby and the ground floor restaurant, an entertainment venue in the form of a cinema was inserted into an already crowded plan. So the cinema was an afterthought. It wasn't planned to be a cinema. Concord, as the cinema was known, was located in the southeastern corner of the project. The developers pushed for the 1,500 seated auditorium, and as a result, space had to be allocated for Concord Cinema within the existing structure, taking the place of some of the hotel facilities, including the kitchen and laundry, which were then moved to the first and second floor to optimize the space. The cinema specialized in showing Bollywood movies as well as Western films, attracting the expanding South Asian community in Sharjah, as well as Dubai and Ajman. In addition to the local Emirati community, Concord Cinema operators offered Mody a 1-year free pass to the cinema to enjoy as many movies as he liked. These are images of the cinema from the inside. Upon completion, once again, it's 1,500 seats. And on the right, you see the drawing of the cinema, quite detailed drawing by architectural consultants. And this is the cross-section of the cinema. In fact, the last movie I watched there was in 2001 with my mother and my late father. We watched the Indian epic Ashoka, starring Shah Rukh Khan and Kareena Kapoor. Unfortunately, the cinema was demolished earlier in 2021, so just a few weeks ago, but it was an important Sharjah landmark. Now, tell you a little bit about the hotel. So it still has not converted into a hospital. So as you can see from the board on the right, until quite well into the construction, the board announced an unnamed hotel. During construction, the Oberoi chain, which is one of India's most prominent hotel chains, showed interest in Al Zahra Hotel, and even to operate it as a franchise, even meeting with the architect to explore the possibility of taking over the building and making it an Oberoi Sharjah. In fact, the Oberoi group in those days was expanding geographically outside India. They had just opened a franchise in Dammam, Saudi Arabia, as well as Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Australia, and in addition to their landmark location in Bombay's Nariman Point. So this was very close to becoming an actual hotel operated by the Oberoi group. Now, why wasn't it finally converted into, why was it finally converted into a hospital and didn't become a hotel? Well, by the late 1970s, Sharjah was witnessing an increasing number of hotels operated by international chains. There was at the outset Le Méridien in Al Khan on the beach. Then there was the 360-room Intercontinental Hotel in Al Hira, the Holiday Inn and the Novotel by the Corniche as well, which were all designed by Western architectural firms such as the Architects Collaborative, amongst many others. There was also a number of hotels designed by local entities like the Palace Hotel. And also across the street from Al Zahra Hotel at that time, a new massive hotel project named Gulf Star Hotel was proposed by the Spanish firm Tipsa in 1976. The Spanish firm Tipsa, of course, was responsible for Bank Street. Although it was never realized, the crowding and mushrooming of hotels may have provided the impetus to Al Zahra's developers to consider other uses for the Zahra Hotel project. Now, the building here, we see images, I think shown for the first time also online. I want to thank Sheikh Majid Faisal Al Qassemi for giving me permission to use these images. Towards the late 1970s, the hotel changed hands, with new owners at the helm, led by Dr. Sheikh Faisal Al Qassemi, a graduate of Cairo University in Egypt, but also a doctor himself. The cost of the building to convert it, in addition, was about 60 million dirhams. Of course, this meant that you had to buy equipment and upgrade facilities. And this cost was borne by a firm that was chaired by Dr. Sheikh Faisal. This is the gentleman here wearing the black bisht. Chaired by Sheikh Faisal Al Qassemi. The company was and continues to be called Gulf Medical Projects. Now, Gulf Medical Projects was founded in Sharjah by UAE and Kuwaiti investors in August 1st, 1979. And this is very important, ladies and gentlemen, because we need to think who came in to invest in the major projects in Sharjah and across the UAE. The shareholders of Gulf Medical Projects came from across the GCC states, but also included members of Sharjah's own ruling family. The investor base of GMP mirrored that of Sharjah in the late 1970s, which had attracted investors from across the GCC, including Bahrain's Al Zayani family, Qatar's Al Fardan, and Kuwait's Al Hasawi and Bahbahani family. So this shows you that investment from the Gulf was essential in building or realizing many of the projects of Sharjah and even in other emirates throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Here you see the official opening of the hospital. The local Al Khalij Daily announced that on Sunday, the 15th of November, 1981, Al Zahra would be inaugurated by Sharjah ruler Sheikh Sultan bin Muhammad Al Qassemi. According to the news report, Al Zahra also included a Chinese medical clinic with staff from the People's Republic of China who specialized in treating chronic illnesses. This must have been one of the first such instances. At the time of inauguration, the hospital included 100 beds and 11 private wings, each with an ensuite bathroom at a time when such facilities were luxuries. The hospital also included 2 surgical operating rooms equipped with the latest medical machines and trained staff. Additionally, an emergency room and critical care center were established. Now, after 40 years of housing Al Zahra, the building has once again changed hands in the last 2 or 3 years and is now known as NMC Royal Hospital, which operates from the original building, as well as adding 2 extensions that we will see in the next slide. A number of facilities were added and everything is largely intact, save for the cinema, which has, as I said, has recently been demolished. Now, I'd like to tell you that this is just a brief overview of one of Sharjah's most important landmarks, the history of this building that we feature in our upcoming book, or actually, I keep saying upcoming, book that has just been released, Building Sharjah. And the research for this project took about 5 years. So I flew to Bombay to meet architect Ashok Mody about 3 years ago. And fortunately for me, he had a lot of the original images that you saw throughout the previous slides, but also his records, sketches, and a lot of the information. And Mr. Mody was very, very accessible. He also happens to be an amazing artist, so he continued to sketch and to design, but also to create art. I will stop here, and I can share whenever you like some images and ideas from the Building Sharjah project.
Sure.
I just unshared my screen. So this is a brief, overview of what Building Sharjah is. So Building Sharjah is a book that took about 5 years to realize with colleagues of mine, led by Professor Todd Rees, who taught at both Yale and Harvard, and is also the author of Showpiece City, a building that studies and surveys the history of John Harris's presence in Sharjah, and many other colleagues such as lead researcher Reem Khorshid and our designer Farah Faryad, amongst many others. I'll take you on a brief tour on the project. We feature buildings, including Al Zahra Hospital, by the way, and we try to situate Sharjah in the 1970s and 80s and show not only monumental buildings, but also smaller structures. We also feature a detailed map of Sharjah circa 1980 with all the important buildings located geospatially, so you can track them. And finally, we have, as you can see here, some more images of what you expect to see in building Sharjah. And we try to tell the story of buildings such as why the airport looks the way it is, what is the story of the clock tower, which we just heard a little bit about, and some of the schools and facilities, including Bank Street that you see here, with 600 images, the majority of which have never been published before. So I'll stop here, and George, I'm all yours if you'd like to step in with one or two questions before we invite a special guest.
Yes, Sultan, we have a few questions for you. First, thank you so much for the amazing presentation. Very diverse, very informative, very rich. So first, we have few attendees that are thanking you for the presentation, and someone that recalled watching the movie Gandhi in the cinema. So I'll start with the first question. First, thank you so much, Ustaz Sultan, for another informative and wonderful presentation. What should be expected about the future of architecture in Sharjah, especially when it comes to preserving and maintaining other buildings?
Well, that's kind of two questions, because the future of architecture in Sharjah is hopefully, with the likes of AUD student Via, by the way, one of your students. I think
this is the question is coming from Via.
That's right. So one of the we're very fortunate in Sharjah in the UAE to have centers and architecture schools such as AUD, amongst others, that are graduating an entire new generation of architects that really care about preserving old buildings, but also the identity of Sharjah and the Emirates and even their countries across South Asia and the Middle East. So I think the future is very bright. I believe that there is now a reckoning across the UAE, not just Sharjah, but Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Ajman, Ras Al Khaimah, and Fujairah, to preserve a lot of our modern history and our modern architectural heritage. So I'm very optimistic in that sense. Unfortunately, we lost a lot of important landmarks over the past decade or two, but this is normal, this is part of development. And if we can at least preserve the memory of these buildings, then we would have at least kept a part of this history with us. With regards to maintaining old buildings, what Via asked, there are now new laws and regulations introduced in the local emirate level and the federal level to preserve modern buildings. So when Dubai has already introduced this in 2018, I believe. So buildings like the Trade Center in Dubai are today preserved. But we also see this thanks to the efforts of individuals like Sheikh Zahra Al Qassemi in Sharjah, preserving buildings like the Flying Saucer, buildings that we all recognize across the UAE, not just in Sharjah. So we also know that Abu Dhabi has recently been preserving a number of buildings. So it's a very exciting time. The Cultural Foundation in Abu Dhabi has just been preserved and reopened. It was a building designed by the Architects Collaborative, the same firm that designed the Intercontinental in Sharjah. So there's a joint history. Architects flew in and they spent time in more than one emirate. So we can tell the story, not just of the buildings, but also of the UAE in the 1970s and 80s.
That's interesting. Also a question about the preservation of the city from Professor Abdel Latif. How does the Sharjah Urban Planning Council play a role, if any, in the preservation of the city?
Well, I can't speak on their behalf, but what I can say is that they were extremely helpful in my research in building Sharjah, and our research of building Sharjah. They were very helpful. And I also maybe here like to say a word about the late Sheikh Khalid bin Sultan bin Muhammad Al Qassemi, the son of the ruler who passed away 2 years ago, almost exactly. Sheikh Khalid, rahmatullah alayhi, was very, very helpful. In fact, I had reached out to him and he immediately put me in touch with people at the Urban Planning Council and of course people with the municipality, and asked them to be very generous with their time. And of course they were very generous their time and the documents. And to be honest with you, without this collaboration, not just in Sharjah, but across the UAE, we wouldn't have been able to produce what I think is really an important and wonderful book. I know that I feel like the parent who's praising their child, but I really feel like because this is a collaborative effort, because we reached out to archive across the UAE, in the UAE, in Kuwait, in the Gulf, in Saudi, that this is why the book is such an enriching publication.
We have a lot of questions privately and in the Q&A, but I would like to ask you in regard of the modern architecture in the region. How do you believe that this modern architecture that has been preserved and that the newly built respectable modern architecture, how do you believe it's shaping our society, especially in the UAE culture, in the UAE community, regarding the previously present culture? How do you believe that this is shaping the social behavior?
Well, if you look at Patricia, if you look at how the buildings were constructed in the 1970s and 80s, you will notice that the buildings were more human size. You will notice that they facilitated the interaction between people. You notice that children played football between the buildings' alleys because they were enclosed in safe spaces. Today, you see highways between these buildings. I don't think they're very safe for children to play football in. So buildings can influence social behavior. I remember in some instances, your parents would send you to your neighbors to borrow something or to ask them for, the most basic items like food products or something that your mother needs to cook a meal. And so today with these giant fences and these giant towers and of course their surveillance cameras, it's a bit more intimidating to go maybe to approach your neighbor to ask them for a little bit of salt or a little bit of whatever you need from them. So I think, of course, buildings influence social behavior. If you think of, for instance, buildings, Patricia, in the 70s and 80s, they all came with balconies. Today, buildings don't have balconies. Very few of them do. And so people used to spend time on their balconies. You see plants being potted plants. You also then see them dry clothes. Maybe in the morning, they'll be sipping tea or coffee, having their breakfast in the balcony. Again, this is a time in which families came together, 3 or 4 members. Today, this is not the same. Today, you see glass towers. There's no way you can put a window, you can put a chair outside. You can't even, Patricia, in many of the skyscrapers in the UAE, you can't even open the window to let fresh air in. So imagine during the pandemic, where people were literally stuck for 6 months or 1 year in a building where you can't open the window for fresh air. So how can you can imagine that it gets a bit claustrophobic, I think. So having a balcony, sitting outside, having fresh air, I think would benefit society a lot. So yes, the building, the architecture does definitely influence social behavior, and I also think mental health.
Yes, exactly. The human scale. This is what we're missing in the contemporary buildings. I have a question also. Again, people thanking you for the amazing lecture and presentation. One main question I have is the building itself as Al Zahra, or the surrounding Al Zahra Plaza, that gave it the extreme importance. So what gave it the extreme importance? Is it the building or the piazza in front of it? Also, did the hospital have a certain social aspect to it, even without the cinema, the hospital itself?
Wow. Okay, these are two big questions. So let's talk first about the square, the piazza, as you called it, of Al Zahra. This building was once, this square was once again envisioned in the 1969 master plan of Sharjah. So many years before the building was proposed, the hotel that became a hospital was proposed, and it was envisioned to be a meeting point of 4 major arteries. So these are roads like Sheikh Zayed Street, Al-Murur Street, coming in from the port, coming in from residential neighborhoods, coming in from the police and fire, the police academy and the fire fighting station, coming in from the government square. So the Sheikh's own office, the Sheikh's own diwan, was situated in one of those arteries going to Al-Zahra Square. So it was a very, very important square as a meeting point for many, many different arteries. The second thing is that the communities are what makes a square important. Squares are not important because they're squares. You can think of many squares that are dead squares. There's nobody that goes there. But Al-Zahra was very vibrant and lively and included a lot of Egyptians and Sudanese people that established supermarkets. If you want to buy Sudanese products or Egyptian full medemmes, things that you just, especially in Ramadan, you go to Al-Zahra Square, and that is where you find the Egyptian supermarkets. The other thing I want to show you is that it became a site for celebrations. I'm not sure if you can see this image, but you see that there are people gathered around. So in Eid, the government would put lights on Al-Zahra Square, and people would go there, celebrate. Children, they play, they go on their bicycles. It was a major square. Wedding, even ceremonies were to be held there. The Sheikh, the parades, the Sheikh's arrival and greetings. So a lot of events would take place on Al-Zahra Square. Al-Zahra Square was also the site of 3 of Sharjah's first skyscrapers, designed by Palestinian Lebanese architecture firm Khatib and Alami, designed by Egyptian firm Mahmoud Riyadh, an Arab engineering bureau, and finally designed by the first Sharjah-based architecture company started by 2 Emiratis. So it was the site for experimental architecture. And all this came together in Al-Zahra Square, which today still retains its importance. It hasn't died down in terms of importance as a square.
Yes. I have Dr. Nabil Shanaf, our Dean, thanking you for the valuable presentation, and has a question also. It's widely believed that modern architecture is universal and denies communities any cultural identity. How do modern buildings in Sharjah contributes to its culture?
Okay, well, thank you, Professor. That's a wonderful question. Actually, the modern buildings of Sharjah contributed in 2 different ways. Number one, when they were first built in the 1970s, they housed a lot of the white collar workers who came from across the Arab world and South Asia and the West even, who were the movers and shakers when it came to not only culture, museums, but also the Sharjah Book Fair, the Sharjah Biennial from the 1990s. So a lot of them came and lived in these buildings. And today, Professor Shanaf, these buildings are being repurposed by a number of entities in Sharjah to become sites of culture and modern architectural preservation. For instance, Sharjah Museums Department is actually housed in a 1970s building designed for a French petroleum company. So I really love the idea that they preserved this building. Sharjah Art Foundation has preserved 4 or 5 major projects, like an ice factory in the eastern coast, the flying saucer in central Sharjah. So these buildings have today contributed to to becoming sites of arts and culture. And lastly, I would say, Professor, is that they also contributed to a sense of a common sense of identity. So people associated with these buildings, you drive up and down, everybody recognizes the central souk in Sharjah. Even if they've never been to Sharjah, it's one of the most photographed buildings, I think, in the Gulf, if not just in the UAE. So people recognize it, they see, they're like, I know that's a central souk, I've never been to it, but I recognize it. It's a major Sharjah landmark. And these buildings, Professor, feature not only in stamps, but also in currencies. So the 5 dirham note of the UAE features the central souk. So they go into the common, the pop culture, the common culture of everyday people in the UAE. They recognize the building. So this is something I think that's very important to be acknowledged.
Sure. We'll take a few more questions. We have a question from Rashid Al-Mulla. Is there any connection of Al-Zahra Hospital in Sharjah with Al-Zahra Hospital in Dubai, or was it mere coincidence that both shared the same name?
This actually, the founders of Al Zahra Hospital in Sharjah founded in 2005 Al Zahra Hospital in Dubai, but today the Sharjah entity was sold to New Medical Clinic NMC, but they still retain control, ownership, and management of Al Zahra Hospital Dubai.
Thank you. A very interesting question. How does color play a role in the urban development of cities, especially Sharjah in comparison to other very contemporary cities? Do you have any prominent example of the role of color?
Yes, I can tell you that in Sharjah, because this is from my experience as working with my dad in the 1990s, there was definitely a preference by the municipal entities for lighter shades, so lighter brown, beige, ochre, sand color, and white. You don't see pop colors in Sharjah like purple and red and blue. There are some buildings, of course, but that is the exception. Other cities have done this, like Muscat, for example, in Oman, that they have also opted for a choice of colors. This contributes once again to having a common identity for the city. And this is something you see in Paris as well, where you have a single ochre color that is not ochre, but a single light beige color that is common to the entire city of Paris almost.
I'm sorry for the multiple questions, but we're very interested in the presentation and in the topic. Few questions from Suzanne Kadura. Amazing knowledge as always. Can you please give us a little context and connection to Rula Square and the Tree Public Art? And is Green Valley still around there, around the square? Do you know who built the flying saucer?
Oh, wow. The first question was, about 5 minutes drive from the Zahra Square was another square called the Rola Square. And the Rola Square was for 100 years the meeting point of people around Sharjah. The Rola tree, which is the name in Arabic of a banyan tree. So in English you say banyan tree, lasted for about 120, 130 years, that tree. But when it fell in the 1970s, there was no longer that gathering space. So the clock tower became the new gathering space from the mid-1970s onwards. The second part of the question, do you know who built the flying saucer? Who built it? No, I do not know. But I'm hoping that people at the Sharjah Art Foundation hopefully are continuing the research to find out. Finally, Green Valley is one of the famous Egyptian-owned supermarkets. Yes, it is still there. Unfortunately, the matriarch, the woman who co-founded the supermarket with her husband, passed away a few months ago, but the husband is still there, and they still provide the same services they did from the mid-70s. I've been there since 1975 or so.
Wow. A question also, where do you see the future of architecture in Sharjah? Is it going towards traditional models or more modern style? And why do you think architecture is a major part of art?
Oh, wow. Actually, this is a good question for me to answer and then segue into a special guest I would like you to invite. So yes, there's a major connection between architecture and art. As you saw, that rendering of Al Zahra Hospital itself is a piece of art. Certainly now we are seeing a bigger connection between architecture and art. Sharjah Art Foundation spurred Sharjah Architecture Triennial. So yes, there's a meeting of minds here, but I want to take this opportunity, Professor Qashami, if we can, we have a special guest for everybody who stuck around until this moment. I think we have joining us from India, a very special guest. Professor, would you please?
Yes, I will do that now.
Sure, and then we will continue with the Q&A questions later.
Yes, please. So joining us, everybody, may I introduce him, Professor?
Please do, please do.
Thank you so much. So joining us from India is a very special guest, who is the architect himself, architect Ashok Mody, who designed... Thank you. Who designed not only Al Zahra Hospital in Sharjah, but a slew of very, very important projects across the city. Mr. Mody, how are you first?
I am fine. Thank you very much for inviting me for such a nice webinar.
Mr. Mody, thank you so much for joining us. May I begin by asking you, how was Sharjah in the mid-1970s when you arrived? How was the plot? How was the area? Was it already built everywhere around?
No. I mean, it was all under construction. I mean, and any activity which was happening was all related to construction. And we had a very nice family-like atmosphere in Sharjah. Practically, we knew each other. I mean, because everybody was connected with construction industry, and it was a very nice cohesive atmosphere at that time.
Mr. Mody, I'm just going to share some images here just to, as you're speaking. So,
Okay.
yes, Mr. Mody, how was the mandate given to you? Were you told you're going to build a hotel, or were you told this is a multi-purpose structure?
No, it was, I mean, told, I mean, that we were supposed to design about 180 rooms hotel.
Yes.
I think, yeah, it was 180 rooms hotel with all basic amenities. And being at the prominent location of Sharjah, we had to plan in such a manner so that practically majority of the rooms face the clock tower. I mean, so it was designed, this L shape was basically designed for that purpose.
Fantastic. And Mr. Mody, can you tell us about family life in the UAE for a young architect? You're 27 years old.
Yeah, I was just married a year before I came to Sharjah, and it was wonderful. We had the best time of our life at Sharjah. I stayed there for 5 years. I mean, from 75 to 80, and we had wonderful family life. And it was so easy. We didn't have many projects, or rather any projects in Dubai, but we used to visit Dubai for any social outings, or maybe going to restaurants or like that. And Dubai and Sharjah were so near at that time. I mean, it used to take hardly 15 minutes or less than that to reach from Sharjah to Dubai. I mean, I mean, between Al Khan and that Al Mulla roundabout, I mean, there was nothing. I mean, there were absolutely deserted place both sides.
And I remember reading an interview with you where you said that you used to go buy bread from Mr. Baker.
Yeah. Many times I would just go to buy bread in the morning. I mean, just for our morning breakfast. I mean, there was a Dubai bakery near Clock Tower, and it used to be hardly 15, not even 15 minutes or so to go to Dubai, and the drive was so pleasant. It was nice. I mean, the best part of my life is spent in Dubai during those days.
That's fantastic, Mr. Mody. I don't know if you want to.
Sultan, I would like to ask Ashok Mody just one question, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, at such a young age, you got a really very important building to design. So can you tell us like the challenges, or at least one of the challenges, and how you managed to resolve it?
No, see, I mean, I was representing a big office from Mumbai. And so our Mumbai office was backing all our design ideas and everything. So I had a backing of my big Mumbai office. We have been in construction as an architectural firm since more than 50 years. And so we had a big backing from Mumbai office. My senior partner, Mr. Jagdish Shah, he was an excellent designer, and he used to come to Sharjah often, I mean, to guide us, I mean, all. So both the offices were working in tandem, and we could do, I mean, besides the Zahra Hotel, I mean, we did many important projects also in Sharjah and dependencies of Sharjah. I mean, this is one of the project. I mean, if you know, I mean, this was done at Khorfakan. I mean, it used to be Holiday Inn hotel when we started. I mean, it was completed in 1979. I mean, and it was the best at the best location. I mean, it was on the cornice of Khorfkan, and very interesting project. Besides that, I mean, we did a lot of individual buildings also for important persons of Sharjah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mody. I want to say that Mr. Mody also designed the house that I was born and brought up in for 40 years of my life.
It happened. I mean, when I met Sultan, I mean, I didn't know that the house where he stayed or his father was my client.
That's interesting. We have a question to both our esteemed guests. Considering the large influence of Indian expatriates in the UAE, are there any buildings in Sharjah or in the UAE in general which would represent Indian architecture?
I'm sorry, I didn't get your question. Is it?
Are there any buildings in Sharjah or the UAE in general which would represent Indian architecture?
I don't think so. At least not when I was there. I don't know. Sultan may be able to throw more light on that.
Yeah, well, there was a mosque that you can see in building Sharjah. There was a mosque that was designed in the 1960s by a Syrian architect called Muhammad al-Azhari, and was known as the Airport Mosque. And it borrowed heavily from Mughal Indian architectural motifs. And he replicated that design in Musalla Al-Eid prayer district, which is adjacent to Zahra Hospital. Again, you'll be able to see a lot of Indian ornamental influences in these two buildings, and they're both featured heavily in building Sharjah. They have their own 2 or 3 pages on their own.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mody.
Yeah, we have a question about the architecture in Sharjah, the future of architecture in Sharjah for Mr. Mody or for Sultan. Is it going towards traditional models or more of a modern style? As an architect who built in Sharjah many years ago, what do you think about the future of architecture in Sharjah?
Well, I'm not. I have left UAE in 1980, and after that I have just visited as a tourist. That is also 2-3 times. So I'm sorry, I may not be able to tell you.
What about Sultan?
Yeah.
I don't know. If I had a crystal ball, I would pick stocks to buy.
Okay. Thank you. So we have a question for Sultan. As we know, you are the founder of Barjeel Art Foundation. Can you touch base on that and share with us your experience in developing such a project?
Okay, I think we should let Mr. Mody go so that he takes a break now, since we have another 5 minutes to go.
Thank you, Mr.
Mody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mody. So the question was about establishment of Barjeel Art Foundation. Is that it? Wow, this is the talk about architecture. But of course, I think my role, as I see, is a person who tries to educate about my country, my region, which I am very much attached to. And so whether it is architecture or art, I think we need to use them both to educate the world and ourselves, maybe even more than the world, about our heritage, whether it is architecture in Egypt or Lebanon or Syria or Iraq or across the Gulf. This is the region that we belong to, and we can use this information to instill a greater sense of belonging and identity in our youth and in ourselves. So for me, art and architecture definitely are both entwined, and that is why I established Barjeel. And again, Barjeel's mandate is architecture from the Arab world only. So I don't look at architecture from the West or the East, which I admire, but I concentrate on my own region because it's important for me to document that part of the world. And of course, I like to bring in South Asia, North Africa, and East Africa, because I feel like we sort of belong to the greater family in this region.
Sure. We're going to benefit from the last 5 minutes. Finish few questions that are that we're receiving. That's a thing, and unrelated to the lecture, but is this a Paul Garagossian painting in the background? And what is the title of it? We have a question.
I keep getting this question. This is a painting by, yes, Paul Garagossian, and it's called Le Cadeau, or The Gift. It dates from the 1960s. Paul Garagossian was a Lebanese of Palestinian-Armenian descent, and he was one of the most prominent artists in Lebanon throughout the second half of the 20th century. And today, his daughter actually looks after his estate in Manuela and does an amazing job. So shout out to Manuela.
Sure. Suzanne Kaddoura is thanking you for the presentation because it means a lot to her as someone who grew up in Sharjah, which is very critical. And she asked, are there any plans to restore the old Al Qassemi Hospital?
Wow. Okay. I am not a government spokesman, so I don't know, but I hope there is. It doesn't look like it because the building isn't in the best of shape, but we've seen miracles happen before. We all were worried that the cultural foundation will be demolished in Abu Dhabi, but Abu Dhabi has really pulled through and made us all very happy by preserving that building. So you never know, miracles do happen. I think it's important to lobby and to educate people, and the younger generation will look after our architectural heritage. I'm just zooming into can you see? This is the close-up of the painting, just for you to see what it is, because you can't see it behind me.
Beautiful.
1967. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you. Sultan, as in your book, The Architecture in Sharjah, what is the dearest project? You're showcasing most of the project. What is the dearest project to your heart?
Wow, Patricia, is this your question or someone from the audience?
My question.
so there's one question that that one building or one project that no doubt sits closest to my heart, which is our own family business building, where I spent 20 years of my life working between 1998 and 2018. The building was demolished earlier this year. So it is called Al Sooud headquarters, of our company's headquarters. And we had to demolish it because the structure wasn't sound enough to withhold another few decades, which is what I wanted. So that building, I found that photo when I went to visit my father's closest friend, and I went through his album and I found a picture of the building upon completion. So I was very, very happy to be able to honor and preserve the legacy of that building. And maybe another building also, it was a Lebanese entity called Mother Cat, which had disappeared from the face of the planet as a building in Sharjah. The Mother Cat company still exists in Lebanon, but their headquarters in Sharjah, which was designed by a Turkish architect, was erased, and very little documentation, if at all, ever existed. And so we are featuring it in 2 big pages with gorgeous photos by an Iraqi photographer called Dr. Nu'man al-Jalili.
Thank you. We have feedback from Dalia Shabarik. One entire section of Al Qassemi Hospital has already been knocked down as SAF was researching it.
Oh, that's very sad. But you can preserve part of a building and not the entire thing. That's also possible.
Yes, thank you.
Sultan, I would like to. Would you like to say something to our audience, like final message, or you could give us insight, advice? I mean, you gave us a lot of information. I have to say it was fascinating. I mean, also the way that you acknowledge each and every picture is like just above and beyond. I have to tell you, it's above and beyond. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Professor. Maybe before I wrap up, I want to say that first of all, I'm grateful to my colleagues, Todd Rees, Reem Khorshid, Farah Fayyad, Ammar Al-Attar. My God, so many people who really made the project happen. I was a contributor, so I don't ever say that's my book. I was part of a team that produced a book, and we all put in endless hours to create this gift for me to Sharjah and the UAE that hopefully you will have in your hands sometime in the next few weeks. The other thing I would say is I would call on all the youngsters here. I see there's a lot of youngsters present in this talk, is document your family's history. Each of you has a library at home. Each of you has a parent or an uncle or an aunt that you can go to and speak and document your own family's history. In building Sharjah, I documented my mother's history because I felt like I needed to write it down somewhere and how she was part of the sort of the urban development. But each of you can document your family's history. For the youngsters, go speak to your grandparents if they are alive. Go and document their history. Ask them how life was. What ordeals did you go through? What are the challenges you faced? Collect photographs. Write the dates in the back. Write who these individuals were and who they are, who appear in the photo. Try and collect this information, because in the next 10 or 20 years, when you are in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, this information will not be available to you. And part of erasing our heritage, which is something that is happening in some cases on purpose, as we see in Palestine, but in some cases out of neglect, because we lose our documents and our archives. With the way that we counter this is that we document our history, so that nobody say that you never existed, so that nobody says that you can be erased. We have proof that we existed. We have proof that we contributed. So please document your history. You don't have to document an entire city. Just document your household. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you so much. I just need to apologize from the attendees, because I'm going to take one last question and end this session. Is there
You're
any
very
artist...
famous, Sultan. There's a lot of questions, but we have to end
exactly.
at one point. I
Yes,
think we can stay for tomorrow if we keep on.
So is there any artist, painter in specific, that did document Sharjah building on their paintings?
Yes, actually, there was an Emirati artist called Al Ansari, and he painted a lot of the early 20th century buildings that we don't feature much in the book, because we look at the modern heritage, the concrete and the cement. But you can, if you go to the Sharjah Art Museum, and in their permanent collection, you will see the fort and some of the Sharjah streets are documented by Al Ansari and a few other artists. But that's a wonderful question. Ubaid Surur is another artist. I'm sure I forgot some people, but some artists did document the history of Sharjah.
Thank you so much, Sultan. Also, a special thanks from our provost, Dr. Sabrina Joseph, that really appreciates everything as a historian. Thank you for the amazing talk, for the amazing presentation, very insightful, very important. And
if I may, Patricia, just one last thing. Sure. I just want to thank Sultan from my side, and I want to add that is not only he's very resourceful and, full of information, he's also an amazing human being. So thank you so much.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sultan.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you all for attending. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.